You did the talk at Lanchester History Club last year, I think it was.
Right, yep, that's yes.
A very nice talk.
I don't think I was at that one.
And knowing the area, it was interesting to try and fit the different places in. And of course, you'll renew my memory correctly or wrongly tonight.
There you go.
My knowledge, of course, is academic.
It's very nice to meet Peter in person on Zoom. So we've been chatting on and off on email and so forth, because we've tried a couple of times, but COVID's got in the way a couple of times to actually get it done in person. But so I thank you for coming on tonight. This is going to literally be his family story about the Second World War, but you'll see if you're on Facebook that he's also had very much an interest in photography over the years.
Very few of my pictures.
And also in due course, if you're interested, he's going to be doing a talk on the closure of the Concert Steelworks early next month as well. So just a little plug for that as well. But just going to check in with Helen that she can hear us all right before I quickly hand over to you. Helen, can you hear us all right?
Yes, I can hear.
That's brilliant. So I'm going to hand over to Peter now, and hopefully the technology will work. So over to Peter.
So we should mute this now.
You can mute now if you want to. Yep.
Yeah. Right.
Hello. I'm Peter Brabban. I'm the youngest child of Tommy and Mary Brabban, who I'm going to be telling the story of tonight, as well as my older siblings. I was born in 1948. That's significant. Well, significant for one thing. I was one of the first national health babies born in the Richard Murray Hospital. But also it meant that I was one of the post-war generation. And that was produced an interesting relationship to the war, in that just about everybody older than you had been part of it, and like you weren't in the club. And people didn't talk a lot about it. My dad didn't talk a lot about it. He answered direct questions, but he didn't talk about it. And so most of my ideas about what the war was like came from things like films. Until I began to get interested in actually what it was like for my family during this wartime period. What did they experience? And once I started researching, I found that it was actually a very different type of experience to that which had been put up on the screen, because what was put up on the screen was mostly a very middle class version of how the war went on, and it didn't give any view. And when I started researching my family, I got interested. It was about 10 years ago, and one of the first things I did was I sent for my dad's army record, because I actually wanted to know what job he did. I knew that he'd been in Dunkirk and in the desert and in Italy, but that was just about it. And I knew he was in Remy, and it didn't go much beyond that. But I learned a lot from the army records, and then I began looking at things that happened to my mum and my brother and my two sisters, and I looked for a working class experience, because my family were working class, or were working class, and there was not a lot of it in books, all over the books, even books with titles like The People's War didn't talk about the majority of the people most of the time. They talked about a minority of people. And so I began to try and put the story together, and some surprising things came out of it. And you can actually screen. Come on. And we're going to, here we go. Here we're going to start the story. Come on, move on. There we go. I did my first presentation in Newcastle, so I had to explain to them where Tantobi was and where Sleepy Valley was. And so that's why you've got this here. I think perhaps you might know exactly where it is and where I'm talking about. Does everybody know where I'm talking about?
Yes.
Okay. It's just down the bank from the main village on the road to Tanfield from Tantobi. And that group of houses you see in front of you there, that's Sleepy Valley. And a lot of the story takes place in that house. This is a picture taken by my brother. It was my brother who got me interested in photography. And this is in, he thinks, 1947 or 48. All the wartime bits and pieces have gone, and some have not appeared. This, in the end, got prefabs in it, and here are the allotments. There's Tantobi up there. This is where my family lived, 8 Ivy Place. A council house with an outside privy, 3 bedrooms, and 2 downstairs, really. Not much to say, but here comes the family. This is my parents. This is Tommy and Mary Brabban. This is in 1939, just before my dad disappears off. Tommy at that time is 35 years old, so he's not a spring chicken. Mary is 31. They've been married 12 years and they have 3 children. There they are. On the left is my brother Ted, Teddy, as he was known. He was 6 in 1939. The middle one, that's Mary Lou. She was just 9 months when my dad went off to war. And that's Jean, the oldest. She was the one that was married to Arthur Carr. She was 8 in 1939 when my dad went. All through the summer of 1939, there'd been a kind of an imminent build-up, a kind of a background noise of war all through the country. And these are our local examples. The Evening Chronicle over there in June, they're quite clearly expecting something to happen. And then, of course, there was the issue of the Anderson shelters. My dad got called up on the 24th of August, that is before war was declared. And it was and he was to report to the Army Field Workshop and Aldershot by September the 2nd. Actually, the little details are what gets interesting here, because what was actually sent to him, sorry, it's not COVID. What was sent to him were his orders, a travel pass, and a money order for 2 and 6pence, as his, an advance on his pay. So every private and every soldier got that. He didn't stay in Aldershot long. He was off with the BEF to France in September, less than a fortnight after he'd actually been called up. In France, he joined with the others, and he spent 6 months doing nothing, playing football, going out and visiting in what we called the Phony War. Meanwhile, back at home, the harsh reality for Mary was actually beginning to catch up to her. Now, the biggest problem, of course, was the lack, or should I say, the diminishing of the family income. My dad had been a bus driver on over £4 a week, and all of a sudden she got the private allowance, family allowance, and it was just over £2 a week. So she was, she had her family income halved. It was a bit like being thrown on the dole. And so she had to cope with, 3 kids and herself on just £2 a week. times are hard. Meanwhile, there's Dad out in France. He got to be very chummy with the people that he actually lived with, which was, I think it was a Polish couple. And they used to send Christmas cards to us. I remember that in the years after the war. It was not much of a time, the phony war, for the soldiers. They kind of moved around, they dug trenches, they froze to death in a really freezing winter. But after 8 months, the Germans decided they were going to sort this out, and they came into, they attacked France via the Low Countries. When they did that, of course, the BEF all moved north to face them, not knowing that there was a second strike coming in through the Ardennes forest. And they were caught completely by surprise as this German advance moved towards the coast. Now, I'm going to stop talking for a bit now, because you're going to listen to me, Dad. Come on. Look. Come on.
We'll march down to the beach. Of course, we were told that we had to make ourselves as comfortable as possible, and there would be transport coming to take us home. Well, we were waiting out to this boat, some were in small boats to go out, when Jerry came over and some German planes came over, and they bombed this boat. They bombed everything that was round about anyway. And one of these bombs went down the funnel of this boat. It looked very much like that. And it just went bang, and that was it. Our transport home had gone then, you see, which meant we had to make our ways back onto the beach and up into the sand hills, and we were told that we get further orders what would happen, you see. Well, this officer we had, he keep coming saying, well, there's nothing today, there's nothing yet, there's nothing yet, nothing yet. And every man for himself, right? There was about a dozen of us kept together. We thought we would keep together in case there was anything that might happen, you see. And we thought we had a better chance if a few of us kept together, and we were all pals, you see. We were all like brothers, as a matter of fact. And there was about a dozen of us kept together, and we had a corporal and a sergeant and a staff sergeant. And they try to keep us happy, you know, and we'll not belong now, but never mind. If we had something to eat, or something to occupy our minds, the only thing we had to occupy our minds was German planes coming over and bashing us all the time. And digging ourselves in. I think I was like a rabbit trying to get into a burrow. But never mind. At night time, I would just snuggle in, and we managed to find an old tarpaulin off a wagon, and we put it over one of these sandholes. There was 3 of us together, and we just cuddled in together and tried to keep ourselves warm and such like. We were very hungry. Nothing to eat. No signs of anything to eat. Water. We had no water. We were both hungry and thirsty. And we took it now turns to go into looking into these wagons that was left derelict, service corps wagons, you know, supply wagons and such like. And I've been there about 5 or 6 days when I went up and I was searching in these wagons for food. And the Germans came over and dropped a bomb, some bombs nearby, and I dived under this ambulance, which was broken down. And I dived underneath, and there was another chap there when I got underneath, and I said to him, "My God, it's hot out there, mate." No reply. Poor man was dead. Well, that was it. And I managed to find a tin of asparagus. And I took it back to the fellows, and we opened this tin of asparagus, and we shared it out, about 12 of us, in one tin of asparagus. That was about one piece each. You know, we never thought of anything tasted so lovely in all our lives. And it was stuff I hated. But never mind, it was something. And that's the way it went on all the week. All the time we were there. I was there 9 days altogether. And believe me, it was 9 days of hell. Really, they didn't kill a lot of people, the shells, you know. They made big holes in the sand. It was just the people that were anywhere near that got killed, or the concussion of the blast sort of hurt people more than what the shell did. It was the same on the sand dunes. You used to make big holes there and used to cover everybody with sand. But the more terrifying thing was the noise of the planes coming towards you. I remember guns at you. And you could hear these things spattering around you, these bullets hitting the ground, hitting the water, hitting the sand. And he said a little prayer, you know. Thank the Lord for that. It's gone. And then it would come again. And we longed for British fighters to come, which never came. Never came. We were all feeling lousy. I was feeling lousy, hungry, tired, thirsty. There was some small boats came in to take us out to a boat that was out, in the sea. And seemingly this boat wasn't for us, and we couldn't get on. It was for some other unit. And we were swimming. We didn't bother with these boats. We were swimming out of this boat to try and get on, you see. We just dropped our gear where we were, and when we came back, the gear was gone. So that meant that we had nothing, just our trousers and shirt. 40 or 50 times we were out and in, out and in. And of course, we all kept together, the 12 of us, you see. That was our plan. If one got away, the rest would get away, you see. And it was disheartening because we could see the other men getting away and we weren't, you see. Of course, they were taking their life in their hands trying to get out of these boats. But the Germans coming over and strapping the water ends to like. There was one man went crazy. This laddie from Liverpool he was. I don't know his name now, I can't remember. But this laddie was carrying a boy's anti-tank gun. I'll never forget this. These planes had been giving us hell all day, and this lad, when these planes came over, he stood up, facing everyone else was trying to dig themselves in, and he went stone mad, and he fired his and his boy's anti-tank gun, had the planes coming over, and it knocked him flat on his back, and it broke his shoulder. And he was completely mad, that man. Anyway, we managed to get him calmed down a bit, but he was taken away, and they took him away somewhere. Some of the blokes took him up to the jetty somewhere, and he got into an ambulance place, and they put his shoulder right. But we never saw him anymore. But he went completely mad. I never seen a man so mad in all my life. And the language he used to them planes was nobody's business. I would like to repeat it. Eventually, after being there 8 to 9 days, 9 days I think it was, this officer came and he said if we could get on the jetty, there was a chance that we might get away. Well, we went on the jetty and there was a boat just leaving when we got there, and there was a destroyer standing out to come in. Well, we laid on the jetty wall, and the Germans came over and the structures were over there. Killed quite a number. There was a man at each side of me killed. And they made everybody scatter. And then when they went away, we lined up again. And this boat came in, and we got on quite orderly. We couldn't do anything else. And we told to make ourselves comfortable on this boat, as comfortable as we could. There was about 1,000 men altogether got on that boat, and we were the remnants of what was left, I should think, on the beaches. There was quite a few more left, like, but they were fighting rearguard action and such like, infantry and such like. And we were a non-combatant unit, you know. That was the. We had no training at all. Well, I was a driver, but we weren't classed as fighting men, you see. Never mind, we got on this boat, and as I say, there was 1,000 men on this destroyer. And we left the jetty. The Dunkirk itself was all it was all smoke in the harbour itself, you know, and there was some oil installations. They were all burning and such like where the Germans had bombed them. And all you could see was the beach. You couldn't see the town at all because it was all, you know, it was all rubble and burning and such like. I felt lousy. I don't think I felt so well. I never have. I didn't feel as bad in all my life as what I did. Of course, I mean, there was hunger, there was tiredness, the kind of a good bed, I should say.
Okay, it's back to boring old me now after my dad. So it was quite moving for me to hear my dad speak. Back in Tantobi, back in Sleepy Valley, Mary actually had no idea this was going on. The whole news of the withdrawal from Dunkirk was kept secret until May the 31st. My dad had been on the beach for 4 days at that point and had another 5 days yet to come. The other thing was that when Tommy got back, and this amazed me when I looked at his army records, he was not given any leave. He was kept in the south. And the only way that my mum got to know that he was safe was he managed to make a telephone call to the post office at Tantobi and asked the postman to get on his bike and go down to Sleepy Valley and tell me mum that my dad had survived. My dad at this point was being taken off to Aldershot and retrained as a driver mechanic. And at the end of that, he was sent overseas yet again. He wouldn't see Sleepy Valley until the war was over. This is the type of stuff that was coming through the door after Dunkirk, in that now arguable state of whether we stood alone or not. You know, the whole Brexit stuff. It was very condescending, much of this. It was saying, like, don't give the Germans your bike. Well, you know. And don't feed them. Don't do any of that type of stuff. And don't go out and have great big refugee queues. And it was as though the government actually didn't trust the working people of Britain to actually behave themselves, you know, and know how to behave in this way. And they come across as a kind of a headmaster going, you know, do as you're told. There was lots of other stuff which was just starting to come out, all about what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing. You know, how to get around in the blackout, what is, you know, what you need to do in a raid, things like that, what you should be eating. Because, of course, from the start of the war, the U-boats got moving and food started to get short, so the government had to introduce rationing. I was talking to Richard before this began about the different ways that rationing has been portrayed in the historical context of the Second World War narrative. And it's mostly seen as something of a nuisance, something which was negative, which people had to put up with. But that's a very much a middle class view. They didn't like actually having to queue for stuff. Most working class people put up with the queues and the shortages because they realized that what was happening with rationing was that, in fact, it was about fair shares. And most working class people were very happy with the idea of fair shares. And in fact, by the end of the war, a lot of working class people, their nutrition was far better than it had been before the war. So it worked for working class people, but not really for middle class people who didn't like being corralled, so to speak. There's also a lot of local type of stuff which is going on. The Stanley News over this period is interesting. It's very fascinating about war news on one side and kind of trivia on the other. It was fascinating. But then again, they ran ads like these ones about the Stanley Savings Committee. And the interesting thing was that one of the members of the Savings Committee owned the house that my brother bought in Dipton. So, coincidences. There's the ration. It's not a lot. It's really not a lot at all. But of course, if you had a garden or you had an allotment, you could actually supplement this very much. And of course, bread was not on ration, and a lot of vegetables were not on ration. These were the stuff that were in short supply. This was the stuff that came in via the Merchant Navy. Mary had been struggling along on her £2 a week since the beginning of the war. But in the end of 1940, she got some help. Aunt Emma, my great Aunt Emma, there she is on the left, she'd been bombed out in Coventry, and she came to live at Ivy Place. And this not only gave Mary a hand with the kids, and Mary Lou actually developed a really strong relationship with great Aunt Emma, but it also meant that now Mary had the opportunity to go out and work and earn a living. Meanwhile, my dad was arriving in Egypt He arrived at the same time as Rommel, which was a bit unfortunate. But he was to take up a new job, and his job in the 8th Army was in tank recovery and repair. And he was embedded with the 7th Armored Division, the original Desert Rats. And he was to be with them right into for the next couple of years. Oops, go back. I tried to find out what his job was, and I'll come on that later. But I mean, Tommy met his younger brother Frank in Egypt. He also Tommy went and played his violin in one of the local clubs in Cairo. He had taken his violin with him when he went to war. He used to play, by the way, in Pelton Cinema for silent films. He found out that his job was to keep the tanks running. Now, British tanks were pretty, infamous for breaking down. In any attack, you would have half of the tanks would break down or be damaged. And it was the work of the RAOC teams to go out to get those tanks, to bring them back and to repair them. There were 3 echelons. There was the frontline echelon, which was a big truck filled with repair goods, which went out and did repairs on the spot. There was the second echelon, where my dad was, which was the workshops tucked in just behind the front lines, where tanks were taken that couldn't be repaired on the battlefield itself. And then the third echelon was back in Alexandria, where they did the refitting and the major repairs. Come on, there we go. Oops. By following the exploits of the 7th Armored Division, I got a pretty good program of where my dad had been and what he'd experienced, including the experience of being in the midst of battle. And this happened to me dad at Gazala, when he was caught in what was called the cauldron, when the Africa Corps armored divisions met the 7th Armored Division in an enclosed space and knocked the living hell out of each other. He then was part of the retreat from Gazala back to El Alamein, called the Gazala Gallop, because it was done without an awful lot of discipline. He was there for the two Alamein battles. The first one's the defensive battle, which held the Africa Corps, and the second one, which actually punched through the African Corps and drove them back. One of the things I found from his army records was the fact that every time my dad got a promotion, it was after one of these engagements. So it made it, I hope it isn't dead men's shoes, but it's most likely it was dead men's shoes that he was stepping into. Here, this is my favourite photograph of my dad. He's in the Western Desert somewhere, North Africa. It must be after El Alamein, because he's a sergeant. And he's playing his violin while the sergeant major is washing his feet, which of course, if you know anything about army discipline, it's one of the things they make a big play about, looking after your feet. I just think of those violin chords, wafting out over the desert. It was, the type of tunes that my dad would have to play for all his mates. Here's a little aside. It's about me, this. 1968, I was working as a studio assistant to a portrait photographer called Mark Gudgeon. He had just been given an assignment by them to photograph a whole series of famous men for the Illustrated London News. So we went down to Sussex, to where Monty lived. He had his caravan in the garden. We went in and set up, and that's I'd put the lights up and all that type of stuff as the assistant. And my boss was chatting to the art director while Monty was sitting waiting to be photographed. So I kind of edged over to him and kind of rather embarrassedly kind of said, excuse me, I would just like to say hello because my dad was in the 8th Army. And I'm sure he'd want to know that I'd actually met you and I want to meet you properly. Monty looked at me and he says, your dad was in the 8th Army? I said, yes. He says, what was he in? I said, I'm not really sure what he was. I think it was Remy and he had something to do with tanks. He says, what was he say? What was his rank? I said, he was a sergeant. Oh, right. And he said, he says, the repair and recovery teams. He says, yeah, fine chaps. And have you ever thought of following in your dad's footsteps? And he looked at me and he saw the long hair and the hippie clothes. And he just kind of muttered, perhaps not. And at that point, my boss wanted to get on with it. So that was the end of my conversation. When I did tell my dad about it, I was quite surprised that he wasn't, over the moon about this. And I said, didn't you rate Montgomery? He says, he was all right, but he was a bit of a stickler, a bit of a straight-laced. And I liked Alexander, he said. So that was my adventure with Field Marshal Montgomery. Here we are in County Durham again. And things are starting to look differently. There you see Joyce's Square with all the Anderson shelters in. And on the right is quite an important building. That was the British Restaurant. What was started out being a feeding centre is then a British restaurant where people could get a cheap meal for lunch. Now, have I got the details? No, I haven't. Let's see if I can remember it. You could get soup for a penny, I think. You could get a meat and 3 veg for 6pence, I think, and it was then you could get sponge and custard for 3pence. So, I mean, for less than a shilling, you could get a good meal. May 1941, this is all of a sudden Sleepy Valley was dragged into the war when a German bomber dropped a whole stick of bombs as it passed over Wickham and then on into Sleepy Valley and Tanfield. That's in Sleepy Valley, all that happened was the bang and some windows got broken and doors rattled. In Sunnyside, it was more serious. A man died and 6 people were injured. But it was there. My brother tells the story of how he rushed back from school at the next day so he could go and get shrapnel in the bomb crater. When he got there, they'd been picked bare by all the kids who bunked off school that day to do that. My sister-in-law, Ted's wife, Mavis, remembers walking over from Shield Road just to look at the bomb crater because it was so big. Famous bomb crater. My mum managed to get a job. In 1942, she became a bus conductor. And that increased the family income quite considerably. It also put more stress on my mum, but it also gave her a fair degree of independence as well. It's interesting that part of the propaganda work that went on, especially in the creative community, was actually doing portraits of people in different settings. So you actually have paintings of women in the munitions factories. You've got pictures of women in the shipyards, and conductors seem to have been bus conductors, that is, to have caught the imagination of a number of people. The A.P. Herbert, the poet, wrote a poem about bus conductresses. There's what's her name? Dame Laura, blah, 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 blah. That's her painting of a bus conductor. Even the Hoover company were using female bus conductors to sell their wares. I'm sorry, the pictures are over, so I can't read you the poem. Anyhow, it's not that good, really. Here's a particular wartime tragedy which happened very close to home to my family. In fact, next door, in number 7 Ivy Place. Their daughter, Rhoda Alice Oppie, 22-year-old, married Lance Corporal G.A. Dixon in Tanfield. Like most wartime couples, they had a few days together, then went back to their duties. Rhoda went back to the munitions factory in South Durham. And within 2 weeks of returning, she was killed in an industrial accident. Less than 2 weeks married. She wanted to be a nurse, but couldn't do that. When the Aunt Emma, you'll see it on the bottom, was told the tragedy, she said, "Oh, something bad was going to happen because there was a black crow hanging around the street." So, yes.
What's the proof in the mind? His photograph?
The one thing that I was amazed at when I was doing the research into what was happening in Tantobi and Sleepy Valley during the war was the amount of entertainment that was available. There was, traveling theatre groups. There was self-organised concert parties. There was big troops of young girls in dance troops, and they all went around doing all sorts of different things. It was a pretty hectic social life. It was all of this was going on. I mean, look at that, Sybil Thorndike in Nikayo, the Merchant of Venice in Tantobi Jubilee Hall. You've got Etty Veal over here and her girls. They put on a pantomime. After all the battles in North Africa, of course, the Germans were pushed out and retreated across the Mediterranean. 7th Armoured Division actually put on a concert party in a Roman amphitheatre in Tunis before they left. And I really, really hope that they allowed my dad to play his violin at that concert party. Anyhow, later on in the year, 15th of September, along with the 7th Armoured Division, Tommy Brabban landed on the beaches at Salerno. The first Allies invasion of mainland Europe. It was hell, to be honest, because the German artillery, had control of the hills all around Salerno and were potting at people as because they could see them out open, and most of the troops that got onto the beach had to find a way to get out of their sight quite quickly. My dad lost a good mate here, another sergeant, who was killed in the artillery bombardment. Eventually, the 8th Army came up from the south, and the Germans retreated, and the Allies forced their way north and went to Naples. Here we are at Naples. There's my dad. That's sending his mum a Christmas greetings, mother dear. There's his brother Frank, and they managed to meet up together again in Naples. They were both in Remy, by the way, so that was helpful. by this time, my dad had been classified as a specialist. So he wasn't just an ordinary driver, mechanic. He was actually a Remy specialist. He'd set up the Remy workshops on the slopes of Vesuvius when Vesuvius erupted, so he had to retreat. I was always fascinated in our house at Dipton that there was a piece of lava which had been shaped into a sort of ashtray. And apparently that had come from Vesuvius. Tommy and Frank met up and they went to the opera. They went to see La Bohème at the newly opened opera house in Milan. In Naples. It was a brutal campaign, the Italian one, and it was waged with not enough resources on the Allied side to easily overcome a really strong defensive positions, and so it was slow moving. It took a heavy toll on the infantry, and it meant that the armored divisions could hardly move at times because of the narrow roads or the mountain passes or whatever, and that made it places like mountain passes and so forth made them easy targets for German artillery. And then, of course, there was Cassino. My dad was there. This was just before D-Day, of course, and this was a real battle of attrition. Many Allied soldiers lost their lives here, and it was a real multinational force that had assembled here in Italy by this time. And there was not only British soldiers there was lots of Indian soldiers there. There was soldiers from Poland. There was soldiers from Brazil. There was French soldiers. There were soldiers from the French colonies. It was a real mix of different nationalities that fought their way up Italy. So eventually, the Germans abandoned Cassino and moved further north to another defensive line, leaving Rome open. So my dad was there when the first European capital was liberated. It was interesting, my dad's attitude to the people that he passed through. From the start, he didn't like the Egyptians one little bit. And I think that was fairly well conditioned into all the soldiers. But his comments to me about the Italians were he'd never seen anybody that was so poor. As they made their way through the countryside, kids with no shoes, etc. Yeah. Here we are back in the northeast. There we are just outside the Catholic Cathedral, selling where they're selling eggs and onions, which was the one thing which people complained that they couldn't get a hold of. There was the queues as well, and these didn't just happen in towns, they happened in small villages. My brother tells the story of a rumour spreading through the village that what's the name of the shop? Well, one of the shops had got sweets, and every kid in Tantobi ended up in a queue in it. And when me brother Ted got his packet of mint imperials, he dropped them on the floor. When he picked every one of them up and put them back in the paper and took them away, they were far too valuable. By now, we actually had visitors in Sleepy Valley. The Americans had arrived. The patch of ground at the bottom of Sleepy Valley had been taken over early in the war by an army crew who set up an anti-aircraft gun there. And they moved out and the Americans moved in. And here we've got another family story about it. It was that my mum invited one of the GIs over for tea. families were encouraged to do this because these were lads who were a long way from home, and they thought it would be okay. And he came along, but before he came along, my brother Ted had been training his younger sister Mary Lou to say, "Got any gum, chum?" He reckoned that it was more likely to get some, a pretty 5-year-old girl was going to get gum rather than a gawky 10-year-old boy. His my oldest sister Jean, by the way, at this point in 1942, had got a scholarship and was attending the Alderman Wood Grammar Schools in Stanley. When eventually VA Day in Tontobi came, I'm sure my family were involved in all the different celebrations, but they were going to have to wait for my dad to get back because very late in the war, my dad had got wounded. His jeep had gone over a landmine and he'd hurt himself, and he was shipped back to the UK before VE Day. But he was still in hospital, so he couldn't go home to enjoy the celebrations. In fact, he didn't get home until 1946. Of course, there was immediately after the war, there was the general election and the Labour landslide. And here they are. This is them. This is me with them. My mum and my dad, 1949. We are still in Sleepy Valley then. We moved from there to Dipton just a couple of months after that. Here's me, my dad and my mum with my daughter Amy in 1973, I think it is. Post-war was not easy. I'll be honest about this. They had grown pretty much apart during the war, my mum and my dad. They hadn't seen each other for nearly 6 years. Both of them would have had what I suppose you could call a good war. My dad had ended up as a staff sergeant in charge of lots of men, and respected for it. My mum had been a bus conductor. She'd experienced the independence of earning her own living. And they were expected to just drop all this and come back and live together. My dad had to go back to being a bus driver in charge of nobody. And my mum had to give up her job and go back to the kitchen sink. And of course, frictions happened. And I'm amazed I actually got born. But that's the story of my family. There is a lot more detail, but to get that, you'll have to read the 2 installments already published in the Northeast Labour History journal, and the next one I'm working on now. So I think we go back to seeing all that, and here we are back at straightforward, and I'm open for questions or comments.
Thank you, Peter. So if everyone wants to unmute themselves and ask any questions, feel free.
Sarah here. Very interesting. Thank you very much for that. I live in Tanfield Lee, so I recognise some of the photos that you've put on. And it's just interesting to see what was there, especially with the allotments down the bank. Now there's a big fancy house. And to hear your story of your family with personal anecdotes was very touching. Very nice. Thank you.
Yeah. The allotments is actually quite interesting because when they did the Dig for Victory campaign, the local council were quite disappointed in Tantobi that they hadn't actually, gone full belt for it. But most people actually were already doing what they were supposed to be doing. So, it's, the allotments.
Did Mum and Dad settle down eventually together fairly peacefully? I would imagine it would be very difficult for your mother having got that independence.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
that's true. It was actually I put it they rowed quite a lot about all the way through my childhood. I mean, my brother actually at one point apologized to me for it happening. I mean, they'd become very different people.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Very difficult. 6 years apart. Yeah.
It's an incredible story of the family. My family were in Wallsend in the shipbuilding industry, and very few of my family actually were in the war, although I had a brother in the RAF and another brother in the army, and he was a prisoner of war for most of the war. But when you look at those photographs and your dad talking at Dunkirk, it's almost a miracle that 300,000 men got off that beach. But it was a hell of a long time, 11 days to be there.
Yeah. And also, did you pick up on the fact that it was his story was not the story we get told to us about things? I mean, you know, almost from the word go, Dunkirk, the highlight of it was the little boats. You know, Dunkirk, the little boats. But my dad just said, well, there were some boats there, we just didn't take any notice. Now, in fact, the real story of the evacuation for Dunkirk was the number of soldiers that the Navy got. You know, it was something like 80% of all the troops that were brought out of Dunkirk were brought out by the Navy. Yeah. I mean, the Navy were the real heroes of that. The other thing that you might, because my dad just flicks over it, when he talks about the officers saying nothing today, then every man for himself. Now think about the implications of that. That is an officer who's abrogating his duty and running away. Because he knew he could get on a boat much better as an officer than trailing along all these servicemen behind him. He just abrogated his responsibilities and ran off. Now, I wondered if my dad had experienced something really, unusual. And then I began reading all these other accounts. Somebody, one of the reasons why the German planes could actually roam so freely in the sky was not about the RAF, but the fact that the officers of the anti-aircraft guns took the transport and ran off, leaving the soldiers behind. And they thought, well, if they're going, we're going. So the anti-aircraft was taken away. That was the stories of soldiers raging about their officers after Dunkirk. They didn't see it. My dad didn't see Dunkirk as a victory. He saw it as a humiliation. And he saw it as, how shall I put it? I don't want to put words in his mouth, but it was the failure of the officer class.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, he'd had first-hand experience of the fact that his officer, when push comes to shove, buggered off and left them. Yeah. But, different story of Dunkirk. It's not victory snatched out of the jaws of defeat. Not if you were one of the poor bloody infantry on the beach.
When you said that the Royal Navy got 80% of the troops back, they had the capacity to do that. But a lot of the little boats from the south coast, they were ferrying troops from the beach to bigger boats.
I don't deny the small boats, and I don't deny their courage of doing it. But the reality was that the vast bulk of the troops were moved off the beaches by the Navy and taken back to England.
Yeah,
and they were being bombed and strafed all the time.
It's interesting where history has its own slant on things. It's how the historians tell the story.
The same with the Italian side of things. I watched the Gary Lineker documentary on that as well. And those guys went through hell, literally. But they don't get the publicity
Yes.
that everybody else gets, because D-Day and so forth all around that sort of time.
The other thing which is unusual about Gary Lineker's programme was that it actually featured a working class bloke.
Mm.
Yes, indeed.
You know, which is what my dad was, a working class bloke. And he was only 5'4". I mean, typical County Durham lad, you know.
An incredible story that you've got all that detail over his period in the conflict, and then your own opportunity to speak to Montgomery. Just the coincidence is incredible.
Yeah. I didn't know whether to put that in, but it stuck in my mind because it was quite funny at the time.
Yeah.
You know, I walked away chuckling when he said, "Perhaps not." The last thing in the world I would is a soldier.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. We've really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yes.
Very much
Yeah.
so.
I've
Me
got
too.
one
Yes,
little fact about
it's been
Tantobi.
excellent, thank you.
Can I give you one little fact about Tantobi? They might have got told off for the Dig for Victory campaign, but they actually they took the plaudits for being the best read village in Stanley District.
All right.
More library books were taken out in Tantobi than any other place, and more non-fiction ones were taken out as well.
I love that, the facts. That's brilliant.
Yeah, they're all intellectuals, you see, in Sleepy Valley.
Brilliant. Anybody else got any comments or questions?
Yeah, I was just going to say by coincidence, my grandfather was also on the beaches of Dunkirk, and he fought his way up through the desert with the Eighth Army, and then up into Italy. So it's I know very little about the detailed history of it, but it's certainly something that I need to do some research on. But there did seem a lot of parallels there.
Mm.
Oh yeah. A lot of lads from the northeast are actually together from the start. And the DLI were with the 7th Armored Division all through Africa, and again in Italy again. Do you know what job your granddad did?
No, I don't actually. No, not during the war. He was a gardener prior to the war.
Yeah.
But no, I really do need to do some research on this. It's just not knowing where to start, really.
Get his army records. That's easy to do. You just send
I
off.
wouldn't disagree with that. Army records would be a very good place to start.
Yeah. It's true. Oh,
Is there any particular website or how would you go about getting his army records?
If you just put the question into Google, and they'll tell you.
Right.
And you get put through it. It becomes. I'm not sure if you send a letter or something like that. You have to prove that you are actually a descendant.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. It's you get all sorts of interesting stuff from army records.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. The other thing is, if you're really interested, go to Durham Records office and look at things like the Stanley News for that period. It's fascinating stuff. You learn all sorts of things when you do that. I mean, that, like I was saying about the social life in Tanfield. Oh, Tanfield Lee. The first woman to be knocked down and killed in the blackout was in Tanfield Lee, in County Durham.
Right. Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Barry, I've just put my email in the chat. So if you want to send me an email, I can send you a couple of links to try and help you get started.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, that'll be good. Thank you very much for that. Appreciate it.
But no, I thank Peter very much for his time, and been a very interesting evening. Lovely to hear your dad as well. as part of the talk as well. So thank you very much for that, and thank you all for taking time out to listen too. So I hope you've all enjoyed it. Keep an eye out because there'll be more talks coming up over the next year. I think a lot of them will be on the Zoom at the moment until circumstances change. We have to adapt to all these things. Whatever do we do without Zoom and Teams before March this year, eh? Amazing. But no, stay well, stay healthy, and thank you all for coming along.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Take care. Bye.
Thank you, Peter.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye.
All right, thanks again.
Okie doke.